You know, it is incredibly easy to take the human body for granted.
Oh, absolutely. We do it all the time.
Right. Like we walk around, we run, we jump, and we rarely think about the internal mechanics that make all of it possible. But I want you to stop for a second and just think about the sheer engineering miracle of modern joint replacement.
It really is a miracle. Yeah.
I mean, right now, there are millions of people walking around living totally normal lives on manufactured artificial parts.
Yeah.
But here is the thing that really bends my mind. When you sit down and look at the source material, how do these manufactured parts actually survive inside the human body?
Well, it's a question that took decades of trial, error, and honestly some pretty spectacular failures to answer.
I bet.
Because the inside of your body is just a profoundly hostile environment for any manufactured material.
See, that's wild to me because when we think of the inside of the body, we usually think of it as, life-giving.
Right.
But from an engineering perspective, it's essentially this hot saline acid bath. I mean, it is a wet, highly corrosive, incredibly salty environment.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And on top of that chemical hostility, it is constantly subjected to massive mechanical pounding. Like every single time you take a step, your hip and knee joints take multiples of your body weight in force.
Precisely. I mean, you are taking metals and plastics and dropping them into a corrosive soup that just never stops moving.
Yeah.
The mechanical forces are immense. We are talking about millions of loading cycles every single year. And the chemical environment is completely relentless.
It just never takes a break.
No, it's actively trying to break down rust and just dissolve whatever you put in there.
So our mission for today's deep dive is to decode the toolkit used by what I like to call the orthopedic alchemists.
I like that. Orthopedic alchemist.
Yeah. We have a stack of sources here, which are essentially the holy texts of material science for anyone prepping for their FRCS exams.
Oh, absolutely essential.
And they detail the exact materials used in orthopedics. So we are going to look at the metals, the polymers, the ceramics, and the cement that holds it all together.
And, to really grasp how these materials survive, we have to start with the fundamental theme that drives this entire field of engineering.
Okay, let's hear it.
It is the golden rule of implant design. Every single implant material we are going to discuss today is a strict compromise between three distinct properties.
Three distinct properties. Okay, let's lay them out.
Right, so those three properties are stiffness, wear resistance, and corrosion resistance.
Let me repeat that for everyone driving.
Yeah.
Stiffness, wear resistance, and corrosion resistance.
You can optimize a material for one, maybe two of those axes, but you can never, ever win on all three.
Okay, let's unpack this. If no single material in existence can win on all three of those axes, I mean, if nothing is perfectly stiff, perfectly wear-resistant, and perfectly immune to corrosion, how do we ever build a functional hip or knee?
Right.
Do we just settle for something that's, mediocre at all three?
Well, what's fascinating here is that engineers took the exact opposite approach. Instead of settling for a mediocre monolithic implant, meaning a joint carved out of just one single block of material, they decided to build a mixed bag component system.
A mixed bag?
Yeah. Modern implants are highly modular. You combine different materials to optimize each individual part's specific job.
So it's basically a puzzle. You take a material that has incredible stiffness, but say terrible wear resistance, and you use it only for the part that needs to be stiff, while attaching a completely different material for the part that takes the wear and tear.
Exactly. You are constantly mixing and matching materials because each one excels in one specific category, even if it completely fails in the others.
I love that. It's a patchwork of necessary compromises. So let's start looking at the individual pieces of this puzzle, starting with our foundational building blocks. The metals.
The metals are the structural backbone of any joint replacement. But if we need something incredibly strong to hold up the human body, a lot of people naturally ask, why not just use steel for everything?
Right. I mean, we build skyscrapers out of steel. We build bridges out of steel. Why not a solid steel hip?
Because of that three-axis compromise. Let's look closely at the three primary metals used in orthopedics, starting with that steel. Specifically, we use a grade known as stainless steel 316L.
316L. Okay, what exactly does the L stand for, and why is this specific alloy in our toolkit?
So the L stands for low carbon.
Low carbon.
Yeah, keeping the carbon content extremely low prevents certain types of structural degradation when the metal is manufactured. But the real magic of 316L is its chromium content.
Oh, okay.
Stainless steel is fundamentally an iron alloy, but it contains a significant amount of chromium. That chromium is what allows this steel to survive the acid bath of the human body
Yeah.
because it provides a passivating oxide layer.
Passivating. Okay, we're going to get really deep into passivation in a few minutes, but essentially it means the chromium reacts with the environment to form an invisible microscopic shield against corrosion.
Yes, exactly. It forms a stable oxide film that blocks the underlying iron from rusting. Now, stainless steel 316L has some great practical advantages.
Like what?
Well, it is cheap to manufacture, and it is highly ductile.
Ductile meaning it can be bent and shaped without snapping?
Correct. A surgeon in the operating room can take a stainless steel plate, physically bend it to match the exact curve of a patient's fractured bone, and it won't break.
But there is a massive flaw, right? Because we don't see permanent hip stems made out of 316L anymore.
We don't. And the reason comes down to stiffness. Out of our three main metals, stainless steel 316L has the highest Young's modulus.
Okay, Young's modulus. That's a term that pops up everywhere in material science, especially on these exams. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, Young's modulus is basically a mathematical measurement of how stiff a material is, right? The higher the number, the stiffer the material.
Exactly. It measures the ability of a material to withstand changes in length when under lengthwise tension or compression.
Got it.
Stainless steel has a very high Young's modulus. It is incredibly stiff. And in the world of orthopedics, being too stiff is actually a catastrophic flaw.
Wait, why? I would think you want the artificial bone to be as stiff and strong as possible so it never breaks.
You would think so, yeah.
Hmm.
But you have to remember you are putting this metal inside living tissue. Bone is a living, breathing organ, and it obeys something called Wolff's Law.
Wolff's Law?
Yes. Wolff's Law dictates that bone grows and remodels in response to the mechanical stress placed upon it. Bone actually needs to feel the weight of your body.
Oh, wow.
It needs to feel mechanical strain to stay healthy and dense.
So basically use it or lose it.
Exactly. Use it or lose it. So if you put a super stiff, rigid stainless steel rod inside a human femur, what happens? The steel is so stiff that it takes all the mechanical load,
Right.
and the bone surrounding it just doesn't feel the weight of the body anymore.
So the bone is literally shielded from the stress.
Yes, and that gives us the clinical term for this problem, stress shielding.
Stress shielding.
Because the steel takes all the load, the bone is shielded from the stress. And according to Wolff's Law, the bone decides it is no longer needed. It weakens, it becomes osteoporotic, and it literally resorbs or melts away over time, leaving the implant completely loose.
That is wild. The implant is so strong that it tricks the body into destroying its own bone.
That is the tragedy of a high Young's modulus.
Oh.
Because of this severe stress shielding, stainless steel 316L is strictly relegated to being a temporary workhorse.
Okay.
We use it for things like trauma plates and screws hardware that is designed to hold a fractured bone together just long enough for it to heal, and is often removed later.
Okay, so to lock that in for the exam prep, stainless steel 316L is used for temporary workhorse items, like plates and screws.
Right.
Again, we use it for temporary items because its high stiffness causes stress shielding.
Exactly.
So if we can't use steel for the permanent foundation of a joint, what do we use?
We turn to the second metal in our toolkit, titanium.
Titanium? Okay, this is the one everyone knows. It sounds futuristic. But why is it actually better for a permanent stem?
Its biggest advantage is directly related to what we just discussed. Titanium has a significantly lower Young's modulus than stainless steel.
Okay.
Its stiffness is much, much closer to the natural stiffness of actual human bone.
So because its stiffness is similar to the bone, they share the load together. It prevents that stress shielding.
Precisely. Titanium transfers the mechanical load much better to the surrounding bone. The bone still feels the stress of walking, so it stays dense and healthy.
That makes perfect sense.
And because titanium is so well tolerated by the body, what we call excellent biocompatibility, it allows for a biological miracle called osseointegration.
Osseointegration, meaning the living bone actually grows right up to and chemically bonds with the surface of the titanium metal.
It truly embraces the implant. The bone grows into the microscopic cores of the titanium.
Yeah.
Add to that the fact that titanium is lightweight and forms its own excellent titanium oxide layer to prevent corrosion, and you have the perfect foundation. Right.
Therefore, its primary use is for stems and nails, the parts that must anchor deep and permanently into the bone.
So titanium is our anchor. It is primarily used for stems and nails. I'll say that again, primarily used for stems and nails because its lower modulus prevents stress shielding.
Correct.
But we have a third metal because we still have parts of the joint that have to grind against each other.
Right. And for that, we need the tough guy of the group, cobalt-chrome, or CoCro.
Cobalt, chromium, and molybdenum.
Yes. Cobalt-chrome is engineered for supreme hardness. It is incredibly tough and has phenomenal resistance to chemical attacks, specifically something called crevice corrosion, which we will get into.
Okay.
But because of this extreme physical hardness, it has superb wear properties. You can polish it to an absolute mirror finish, and it will resist scratching incredibly well.
So if it's that hard, its primary use must be for the bearing surfaces, the parts that actually rub together. Exactly. Its primary use is for the bearing surfaces, the femoral head, which is the ball of the hip joint, or the rounded, gliding components of a knee replacement. It takes mechanical friction beautifully.
But returning to our theme of compromise, it must have a flaw.
It does. It is very, very stiff. Cobalt chrome has a high Young's modulus, just like stainless steel, even slightly higher.
Oh, wow.
Which means if you made a whole hip stem out of cobalt chrome, it would cause terrible stress shielding and bone resorption.
Okay, I want to use an analogy here to help visualize how these three metals work together, especially if you're trying to memorize this. Instead of just thinking of them as random elements, let's think of them like constructing a building in an earthquake zone.
I like this.
Titanium is your foundation piling. It has a lower modulus, meaning it has a little bit of flex. It integrates with the surrounding bedrock and sways slightly with the load, holding the structure steady without breaking the earth around it.
Right.
Cobalt chrome is your industrial flooring. It's the hard, unyielding surface taking the constant, high-impact wear and tear of machinery rolling over it all day.
Yes.
And stainless steel is your scaffolding. It's cheap, it's stiff, it gets the temporary jobs done, like holding things in place while the concrete cures, but you eventually take it down.
That is a great way to picture it.
But this brings up a major trap, something that I know confuses a lot of people when they first look at this material.
Let's hear it.
If titanium is so incredibly biocompatible and the body loves it so much, and it's strong enough for the aerospace industry, why can't we just make the bearing surface out of titanium too? Like, why introduce cobalt chrome at all? Why not just have a titanium stem and a titanium ball?
It's a very common misconception and honestly, an absolute trap on material science exams.
Really?
Yeah. The answer comes entirely down to wear resistance. Despite being a fantastic structural metal, titanium has terrible wear resistance.
Wait, how can a metal used in fighter jets be bad at resisting wear?
Because strength and hardness are not the same thing. Titanium is strong, but its surface is actually quite soft, and it suffers from something called notch sensitivity.
Notch sensitivity? What is happening there at the microscopic level?
Imagine the surface of the titanium. If it gets even a microscopic scratch, a tiny notch, that notch acts as a stress concentrator.
Okay.
When two pieces of titanium rub against each other, they don't slide smoothly. They gall.
Gall.
Yeah, they microscopically catch on each other. And because the metal is soft and notch sensitive, those tiny scratches propagate into cracks, and huge chunks of the metal simply flake off.
Oh, yikes.
If you try to use titanium as a bearing surface, rubbing it against another material, it wears horribly. It rapidly generates massive amounts of toxic black debris, destroying the joint in record time.
So it's strong enough to hold up an airplane, but if you rub two pieces together, they essentially chew each other to pieces.
Exactly. It is a fantastic stem, but it makes a terrible, terrible ball.
Okay, so wrapping up our foundational building blocks. If you only remember one thing about these metals, remember this. Titanium is for stems because it has the lowest modulus. Cobalt chrome is for bearings because it is incredibly hard and wear resistant. And stainless steel is the stiff, temporary workhorse.
That perfectly summarizes the toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where the alchemy gets dangerous.
Oh boy.
By having these three distinct metals, we've solved the mechanical problems, but we have introduced a brand new, highly destructive chemical problem.
Which brings us to the chemistry of the acid bath corrosion and passivation.
Right.
We just established we need different metals for different parts of the joint. We are going to plug a cobalt chrome head onto a titanium stem. But what actually happens when you lock two different metals together and leave them inside the wet, salty, highly conductive environment of the human body?
That is where the environment fights back.
Yeah.
We need to talk about corrosion. But before we explain how a metal corrodes, we need to understand how it naturally tries to protect itself.
Okay.
That mechanism is called passivation.
You mentioned passivation earlier, specifically with the chromium in the stainless steel. What exactly is passivation at the atomic level?
Passivation is basically a metal's invisible armor. When certain metals are exposed to oxygen either in the air or in bodily fluids, the surface atoms react instantaneously to form a very thin, highly stable oxide film.
How thin are we talking?
We are talking about a layer only a few nanometers thick, but this microscopic film acts as an impenetrable barrier, shielding the underlying raw metal from further chemical attack.
So it rusts just a tiny microscopic bit,
I know.
and that initial rust forms a shield that stops the rest of the metal from rusting.
Exactly. It's a self-limiting reaction. Chromium provides this oxide armor for stainless steel and cobalt-chrome, and titanium naturally creates its own titanium dioxide armor.
But armor can be broken.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens when we mix our puzzle pieces? What happens when dissimilar metals physically touch each other in the body?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of our wet, salty environment, we run into the phenomenon of galvanic corrosion.
Galvanic corrosion.
Galvanic corrosion occurs when you have two completely different metals placed in direct physical contact while submerged in a conductive fluid.
And human blood and interstitial fluid are highly conductive.
Extremely. They're basically saltwater electrolytes.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If you take two different metals, touch them together, and drop them in salt water, you aren't just making a joint. You are literally building a crude, destructive battery inside the human body.
That is the perfect analogy. You are creating a galvanic cell. Because the two metals are different, they sit at different places on the galvanic series. They have different electrical potentials.
Right.
When they touch in that fluid, an electrochemical circuit is completed. Electrons flow from one metal to the other.
And what's the physical result of those electrons flowing?
One of the metals becomes the anode, and the other becomes the cathode.
Yeah.
The metal acting as the anode will begin to corrode preferentially and aggressively.
Oh, wow.
It sacrifices itself, dissolving into the bodily fluid to protect the other metal. This is exactly what happens if a surgeon makes the catastrophic mistake of mixing a stainless steel stem with a cobalt-chrome head.
Wait, really? A stainless steel stem with a cobalt-chrome head?
Yes. The electrical potential difference between those two specific alloys is significant. If you lock them together in the body, the galvanic circuit fires up, and the stainless steel rapidly corrodes away right at the junction.
Wow. Okay, I want to lock those conditions in for the listeners. Galvanic corrosion happens specifically when you have two dissimilar metals touching in a conductive fluid. I'll say it again. Galvanic corrosion requires two dissimilar metals in physical contact inside a conductive fluid. The result is a battery that destroys your implant.
Very well said.
But that's not the only way the body attacks these metals, is it?
No, the chemistry is relentless. We also have crevice corrosion.
Crevice corrosion. I assume this happens in small gaps.
Yes. This type of corrosion thrives in confined, low-oxygen spaces. Imagine the tiny microscopic gap underneath the head of a surgical screw that has been tightened tightly against a metal plate.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Bodily fluid seeps into that tiny crevice, but because the gap is so tight, fresh oxygen can't cycle through.
So the fluid inside the crevice becomes stagnant and depleted of oxygen.
Exactly. And when the oxygen is depleted, the local chemistry inside that tiny gap radically changes.
How so?
The metal ions build up, attracting chloride ions from the salty body fluid, which essentially creates hydrochloric acid in that microscopic space.
Yikes.
Yeah. The environment becomes highly acidic, the pH plummets, and that acid aggressively eats away at the metal's passivation layer.
So just by having a tight gap, you create a localized pocket of acid. That is terrifying.
It is. Crevice corrosion happens in confined, low-oxygen spaces, and closely related to that is pitting.
Pitting just sounds like localized surface damage.
It is. Pitting is essentially a highly localized breakdown of the passivation layer on an open surface. It forms deep, narrow holes or pits. It's often driven by the same chloride ions attacking a weak spot in the oxide armor.
Okay, so we have galvanic corrosion from mixing metals, crevice corrosion in low oxygen gaps, and pitting on the surface. But there is one more type of corrosion, and from what I understand from more sources, this is the absolute final boss of orthopedic failures.
It is arguably the most critical and complex mechanism for modern joint replacements. Fretting corrosion.
Fretting. What is happening mechanically and chemically there?
Fretting corrosion is the catastrophic combination of mechanical wear and chemical attack. It is caused by micromotion.
Micromotion? How micro are we talking?
Barely visible to the naked eye, fractions of a millimeter.
Okay.
When you have two loaded surfaces pressed tightly together, like where the cobalt-chrome head of the implant connects to the neck of the titanium stem, they are subjected to massive loads every time the patient walks. Because they are separate modular pieces, no matter how tightly you jam them together, They will experience tiny microscopic shifting and vibrations against one another.
And what does that microscopic vibration actually do?
It acts like sandpaper. That micromotion mechanically rubs and scrapes away that beautifully protective passivation armor, the oxide layer.
But wait, didn't you say earlier that the oxide layer instantly reforms, like it's self-limiting?
It does reform, and that is the engine of the destruction.
Wait, what?
The micromotion scrapes off the protective oxide layer, exposing raw, unprotected metal to the bodily fluids. The raw metal instantly corrodes, forming a new oxide layer.
Okay.
But a millisecond later, the patient takes another step, another vibration occurs, and that brand new oxide layer is immediately scraped off again.
Oh, man. So it's an infinite loop.
Yes. This continuous, relentless cycle of scraping, exposing raw metal, oxidizing, and scraping again literally excavates the metal. It produces deep pits, massive grooves, and generates a huge amount of toxic, oxidized metal debris that is shed directly into the surrounding tissue.
So just tiny microscopic vibrations can literally eat solid metal away from the inside out.
Yes, and this raises an important question because it points out a fundamental paradox in our design.
What's the paradox?
We established earlier that we have to mix materials. We need a cobalt-chrome head for wear and a titanium stem for the bone. We are forced to make a junction.
Right.
But by creating that junction, we guarantee this micromotion and invite fretting corrosion.
It's a ticking time bomb built into the very architecture of the joint. You solve one problem and create a monster.
It is a massive clinical issue. This fretting corrosion at the modular head-neck junction, junction surgeons call the trunnion, is the invisible enemy of modern implants.
Trunnion?
Yeah, it leads to a condition called trunnionosis, and we are going to look very closely at the physics of that junction at the end of this deep dive.
I can't wait. Okay, so synthesizing the chemistry of the acid bath. If you only remember one thing about corrosion, remember this. Passivation is the invisible oxide armor. Galvanic corrosion comes from mixing dissimilar metals to form a battery. And fretting corrosion is the vicious cycle of micromotion continuously scraping away the armor at modular junctions.
Excellent. Now that we understand the metals and the hostile chemistry they face, we need to look at how we physically manufacture them before they ever reach the hospital.
Right. We know the ingredients, but how do we cook them? How do we physically manipulate a block of raw titanium or steel so it can endure the weight and torque of a human being walking for 20 years without snapping?
We have to dive into metallurgy and processing. We're going to focus on two contrasting methods of shaping metalwork hardening and annealing.
Okay.
They are absolute direct opposites in both their process and their outcome. Let's look at work hardening first, which you'll also hear referred to as cold working or strain hardening.
Cold working. The name implies we aren't using heat.
Exactly. This is the process of physically deforming the metal at room temperature.
Yeah.
We're talking about bending, hammering, drawing, or rolling the metal under immense pressure without melting it.
What does hitting it with a hammer at room temperature actually do to the metal on a microscopic level?
To understand this, you have to picture the atomic structure of the metal. Metals are crystalline. Their atoms are arranged in neat, orderly grids called lattices.
Right.
But these grids are never perfect. They have missing atoms or extra rows, which we call dislocations. When you physically deform the metal at room temperature, you are forcing these layers of atoms to slide past one another.
So the grid is shifting.
Yes, and as the grid shifts, you create more and more of these dislocations. Work hardening radically increases what we call the dislocation density within the crystal structure.
Okay.
Furthermore, the actual shape of the microscopic grains of the metal gets stretched and flattened.
So you are basically creating microscopic chaos inside the metal. What does a higher dislocation density actually achieve in terms of physical properties?
Think of the dislocations like cars on a highway. When there are only a few cars, they move easily. The metal can yield and bend.
Yeah.
But as you hammer the metal and create millions of new dislocations, you create a massive traffic jam. The dislocations tangle up and lock each other in place. Because they can no longer move, the metal physically cannot bend easily anymore.
The result being?
The result is that the metal becomes much stronger and much stiffer.
But there is a trade-off.
A huge one. Because all those dislocations are jammed and the metal can't yield, it becomes highly brittle and much less ductile.
Less ductile meaning it can't bend anymore without simply snapping in half. I've got an analogy for this. I think we've all done this at a desk. The classic paperclip analogy.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. If you take a metal paperclip and you bend it open, that first bend is pretty easy. The atoms are sliding. But if you try to bend it back and forth right at that exact same joint, what are you doing? You are cold working it. You are work hardening that specific spot.
Exactly. You are massively increasing the dislocation density right at that hinge.
And as you keep bending it, it gets stiffer. It gets much harder to push until suddenly, snap, it breaks cleanly in two. It became completely brittle and suffered catastrophic failure.
That is a perfect visualization. You increase the strength and stiffness right up until the point of brittle failure. If we look at this on an engineering graph, a stress-strain curve, work hardening physically shifts the curve to the left.
Shifts to the left.
Right. The metal can take more stress, meaning strength, but much less strain, meaning stretching before breaking.
Okay, let me repeat the effects of work hardening because this is a crucial concept for the exam. Work hardening makes metal stronger and stiffer, but more brittle and less ductile. One more time. Work hardening equals stronger and stiffer, but more brittle and less ductile.
Spot on.
So if work hardening is the traffic jam, what is annealing?
Annealing is the direct opposite. It is the process of taking that metal and heating it to a very specific high temperature just below its melting point, holding it there for a period of time, and then letting it cool slowly.
What does all that thermal energy do to our traffic jam?
It acts like a giant reset button. The high heat provides the atoms with enough thermal energy to break out of the traffic jam. It clears out those packed dislocations we cause during work hardening.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it relieves all the internal stress locked inside the metal, and it allows the crystal structure to actually recrystallize and form fresh, new, orderly grains as it cools down.
So if the process is the opposite of work hardening, the physical result must be the opposite too?
It is. The result is that the metal becomes much more ductile, but overall less strong and less stiff. It shifts the stress-strain curve back to the right.
So the heat basically makes it bendy again. It restores the metal's ability to deform and stretch without snapping.
Exactly. And this brings up a very classic misunderstanding. It is a notorious exam trap for engineering and medical students studying this field.
Ooh, let's highlight the trap. What is it?
Because work hardening makes things harder and stronger, people intuitively think that annealing, which relieves that stress and makes things softer, must somehow decrease ductility.
I see the logical trap there. They associate hard with strong, so soft must mean weak and fragile, like glass.
Right. But it is exactly the opposite. The false belief is that annealing decreases ductility. In reality, annealing restores and increases ductility.
Wow, okay.
It gives the metal back its ability to bend, yield, and absorb energy without fracturing.
Okay, that is a fantastic distinction. Annealing increases ductility.
Hmm.
Before we move on from the metals and how we process them, I want to do a mid-episode recap. I want to make sure I have this whole picture straight. Let me try to synthesize this first half of our toolkit.
Go for it.
First, we have our metals. Titanium is for stems because it has a low modulus that prevents stress shielding. Cobalt-chrome is for bearings because it's insanely hard. Stainless steel is just a stiff, temporary workhorse.
Yes.
Then we drop them in the body and we fight corrosion. Passivation is the invisible oxide armor. Galvanic corrosion happens when we stupidly mix dissimilar metals and build a battery. And fretting corrosion is the micromotion at modular junctions that constantly scrapes away the armor. And finally, processing. Work hardening uses cold deformation to make metal stronger but brittle. Annealing uses heat to reset the crystals and restore ductility.
You've got it perfectly.
Awesome. So if you only remember one thing from this processing section, work hardening makes metal stronger but more brittle. Annealing uses heat to reverse this and restore ductility.
But, as robust as our metal knowledge is now, we still have a major anatomical problem.
What's that?
Even with highly polished cobalt-chrome, putting metal directly rubbing on metal or bone is usually a recipe for disaster. We need to cushion. We need artificial cartilage.
Which brings us to the next massive chapter in our deep dive, the plastic buffer. Enter the polymers. But to be clear, we aren't talking about the plastic in a water bottle or a Lego brick.
Far from it. We're talking about a highly specialized engineered polymer known as UHMWPE. That stands for ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene.
Ultra-high molecular weight. Let's break that down. What does that actually mean at the chemical level?
Imagine a standard plastic molecule as a piece of spaghetti. Regular plastics have relatively short strands of spaghetti. UHMWPE is made of incredibly long, massive, continuous chains of polyethylene molecules. We are talking millions of molecular weight units per chain.
Wow.
These massive intertwined chains give it incredible toughness, low friction, and great impact resistance. For decades, this was the absolute gold standard bearing liner. It sits inside the metal cup in the pelvis, and the metal ball rubs against it.
But as we know by now, every material has a fatal flaw. What is the kryptonite for this superplastic?
The ultimate mortal enemy of polyethylene is oxidation.
Oxygen. Just plain old oxygen from the air or the body.
Yes, when oxygen molecules interact with these massive polymer chains, they cause a chemical reaction called chain scission.
Chain scission.
The oxygen literally attacks the carbon backbone and breaks those incredibly long strands of spaghetti into shorter, weaker pieces.
And what happens to the physical plastic when the chains break?
It undergoes severe oxidative degradation. The material becomes highly embrittled. It loses its toughness, and under the weight of the patient walking, it starts to delaminate.
Delaminate.
Meaning it literally peels and flakes apart in macroscopic layers, shedding massive amounts of plastic debris into the joint.
That sounds like a complete failure of the cushion.
It is catastrophic that the threat of oxidation is so severe that UHMWPE must be manufactured, packaged, and stored in a completely inert atmosphere, usually packed in nitrogen or argon, totally devoid of oxygen.
Okay, that is crucial. I'm going to emphasize the enemy here. Polyethylene's greatest enemy is oxidation. Again, the ultimate enemy is oxidation, which causes chain scission. But the orthopedic alchemists didn't just stop there, did they? They tried to re-engineer the plastic to make it even better.
They did.
Yeah.
As good as standard UHMWPE was, it still slowly wore down over 10 or 15 years. Engineers wanted to drastically improve the wear resistance so these joints could last a lifetime. So they developed a second-generation cross-linked polyethylene, or XLPE.
How do you cross-link a massive plastic molecule?
You hit it with extreme energy, specifically high doses of gamma irradiation.
Gamma radiation, like Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk.
Basically, when you blast the plastic with gamma rays, the radiation knocks hydrogen atoms right off the carbon backbone of the polymer chains.
And when a hydrogen atom gets knocked off, what does it leave behind?
It leaves behind a highly reactive, unpaired electron, which in chemistry we call a free radical.
Ah, free radicals.
Now here is where the cross-linking happens. These free radicals hate being alone. They aggressively seek out other free radicals on adjacent polymer chains. When they find each other, they bond together, forming a permanent covalent chemical bridge, a cross-link between the two parallel polymer chains.
So going back to our spaghetti analogy, it's like taking all those long, loose strands of spaghetti in the bowl and physically tying them together with millions of little string knots, creating one massive, dense, interconnected net.
That is exactly what happens, and this dense cross-linked net is incredibly tough. This process dramatically reduces the physical wear weight of the plastic.
But wait, I'm looking at the chemistry here. You just said the radiation creates free radicals by knocking off hydrogen, and those free radicals bond together to form the crosslinks, but they can't possibly all find a partner, right? Doesn't the radiation leave behind a bunch of residual, lonely free radicals trapped inside the plastic?
What's fascinating here is that you've hit on the exact tragic irony of the early cross-linking process. The very radiation used to make the plastic wear-resistant leaves behind thousands of residual free radicals trapped deep inside the material.
And free radicals are highly reactive.
So what do you think they love to react with?
Oxygen.
Exactly. The residual free radicals react aggressively with any oxygen they encounter, rapidly accelerating the chain scission we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So in their quest to fix the mechanical wear problem, the engineers accidentally created a chemical time bomb.
Oh, wow.
They made a plastic that would self-destruct from oxidation much faster.
Oh, man. It is always a compromise. Every time you pull one lever, another one breaks. So how did they fix the free radical problem? Because people still get cross-linked plastics today.
There are two main solutions to neutralize the free radicals. The older thermal method is sequential irradiation and annealing.
Annealing, heating it up again.
Right. After irradiating it, they bake the plastic, essentially melting it just enough to allow the trapped polymer chains to move around. This gives the lonely free radicals mobility so we can find each other, combine, and extinguish.
Okay.
But melting the plastic decreases its mechanical strength.
So what is the modern solution?
The modern, elegant solution is purely chemical. We dope the plastic with vitamin E.
Vitamin E, like the literal supplement you buy at the pharmacy.
Exactly the same molecule. Alpha-tocopherol, vitamin E is a powerful antioxidant.
How does an antioxidant actually work in this context?
It acts as a sacrificial electron donor. By infusing the plastic with vitamin E, the vitamin E molecules act like a molecular sponge. When those dangerous residual free radicals go looking for something to react with, the vitamin E steps in and hands over an electron, completely neutralizing the free radical without breaking the polymer chain.
The vitamin E sponge, I love that. It just sits inside the plastic and absorbs the chemical danger, completely neutralizing the oxidation threat without having to melt and weaken the plastic.
It's brilliant.
Now, on a practical manufacturing level, how do they actually shape these plastic liners? Do they just take a huge block of this vitamin E plastic and carve it out?
They can, and that process is called machining from an extruded bar. But the preferred superior manufacturing method is direct compression molding.
Why is molding better than carving?
Because of the surface finish and the molecular alignment. By taking the polyethylene powder and molding it directly into its final cup shape under immense heat and pressure, you avoid cutting through the polymer chains.
Oh, I see.
This yields significantly lower wear rates and much smoother bearing surfaces compared to carving it on a lathe.
Okay, so we have this amazing, highly cross-linked, vitamin E infused, compression molded superplastic. Do we use it everywhere? Hips, knees, shoulders.
No, and this is a vital distinction. There's a very specific hip versus knee rule here regarding cross-linking.
Let's hear.
Cross-link polyethylene, or XLPE, is absolutely perfect for the hip joint.
Why the hip?
Because the hip is a highly conforming ball and socket joint. The mechanical loads are spread evenly over a large surface area. The primary mechanism of failure in a hip is abrasive, where the ball just rubbing against the cup millions of times.
Right.
XLPE's incredible wear resistance shines perfectly here.
But not in the knee. What makes the knee different?
The knee is a completely different mechanical beast. It is not a deep conforming socket. It is essentially two rounded metal knuckles rolling and sliding on a relatively flat plastic plate.
So all your body weight is focused on two tiny points of contact.
Exactly. The knee sees extremely high contact stresses, massive point loads, and high shear forces. Now, remember what we did to the XLPE? We radiated it and tied all the chains together. That made it wear resistant, but it also made it slightly more brittle and less resistant to crack propagation.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Under the specific high-stress pounding and point loading of a knee joint, that brittle XLPE is highly prone to subsurface fatigue cracking and catastrophic mechanical failure. The plastic literally cracks and falls apart.
So because of those high contact stresses, we can't use the cross-link stuff in the knee. We have to use the older generation.
Correct. Conventional UHMWPE, the uncross-linked, slightly tougher plastic, is still heavily preferred for the knee, while highly cross-linked XLPE is the standard for the hip.
That is a brilliant mechanical distinction. Okay, wrapping up the polymers. If you only remember one thing here, polyethylene's greatest enemy is oxidation. Gamma irradiation cross-links it for better wear, but creates free radicals. We require a vitamin E sponge to neutralize those free radicals, and crucially, we use XLPE in the hip, but conventional UHMWPE in the knee because of high contact stress.
Excellent summary. So we now have a titanium stem, a cobalt-chrome head, and a polyethylene plastic cup. The puzzle pieces are ready.
Awesome.
But we have a major logistical problem. How do we securely attach a smooth plastic cup or a smooth metal stem into the porous, bleeding cavern of a living human bone?
Right. Which brings us to the glue, holding it all together. But wait, I know this is a trap. We don't actually use glue, do we?
No, we absolutely do not use glue. We use bone cement, which is scientifically known as PMMA, or polymethyl methacrylate.
PMMA. I want to do a deep dive into the actual chemistry of this cement because it is fascinating and happens right there in the operating room. It comes in a box with two distinct parts, right?
It does. It comes as a pouch of powder and a glass vial of liquid. And if you are studying this field, it is absolutely critical to know exactly what chemical is in each part and what its job is. Let's start with the powder.
The powder pouch, what's in it?
The powder contains three things. First, pre-polymerized PMMA beads, basically tiny spheres of already hardened plastic.
Okay.
Second, an initiator chemical called benzoyl peroxide. And third, barium sulfate.
Let me guess the barium sulfate. You mentioned earlier we need to see things on X-rays.
Exactly. Barium sulfate is a radiopacifier. Without it, the hardened cement would be completely invisible on an X-ray, and surgeons wouldn't be able to see if they got it into the right places or if there were massive air gaps.
Okay, so the powder has the PMMA beads, the benzoyl peroxide initiator, and the barium sulfate. What about the glass vial of liquid?
The liquid also contains three crucial elements. First, the raw methacrylate monomer, the liquid building block.
Right.
Second, an accelerator called DMPT. And third, a stabilizer called hydroquinone.
Hydroquinone. What is the job of a stabilizer in the liquid?
Think of hydroquinone as a bouncer at a club.
A bouncer.
Yeah. The monomer molecules in the liquid naturally want to react with each other and polymerize. If you just left a bottle of pure monomer on a warehouse shelf, ambient heat and light would eventually cause it to react and harden into a solid block.
Oh, that's no good.
Right. The hydroquinone bouncer steps in and scavenges any premature free radicals, ensuring the liquid stays liquid while it's sitting in storage. It gives the product a safe shelf life.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, I am going to repeat those components because they are so critical to understanding the reaction, especially for the exams.
Go for it.
The powder contains PMMA polymer beads, benzoyl peroxide is the initiator, and barium sulfate for X-ray visibility. The liquid contains methyl methacrylate monomer, DMPT as the accelerator, and hydroquinone as the stabilizer. One more time, lock it in. Powder polymer beads, benzoyl peroxide initiator, barium sulfate, liquid monomer, DMPT accelerator, hydroquinone stabilizer.
Perfect.
So the surgeon opens the pouch and the vial and mixes the powder and the liquid together in a bowl. Chemically, what happens?
You trigger an exothermic free radical polymerization.
That is a mouthful. Let's break it down. Exothermic, meaning it generates heat.
Incredibly intense heat. When the DMPT accelerator in the liquid meets the benzoyl peroxide initiator in the powder, the DMPT forces the peroxide to split apart. This split creates a massive burst of free radicals.
And what do those free radicals do?
They aggressively attack the double bonds in the liquid monomer, causing the monomer molecules to link together into long chains, which then tangle with the powder beads.
Wow.
This chain reaction happens extremely fast, and the chemical bonds forming release a massive amount of thermal energy.
How hot does it actually get in the operating room?
It routinely reaches temperatures over 80 degrees Celsius or 175 degrees Fahrenheit. If you held a large ball of curing bone cement in your bare hand, it would severely burn you.
But the surgeon is stuffing this boiling hot cement into a living human bone. Doesn't that damage the tissue?
It does. The heat causes localized thermal necrosis. It essentially kills a microscopic layer of the bone immediately touching the cement.
That sounds bad.
It's not ideal,
Mm-hmm.
but surgeons manage this by working quickly and using irrigation to cool the surrounding tissues,
Yeah.
and the body eventually heals and remodels around that tiny dead layer.
Wow. Okay, so once the exothermic reaction finishes, it cools down and sets into a solid plastic mantle. What are its mechanical properties? How stiff is this hardened cement?
This is the genius of PMMA. It's Young's modulus. Its stiffness sits perfectly right between cortical bone, which is the hard outer shell of your femur, and a cancellous bone, which is the soft, spongy interior.
So it's a mechanical bridge.
Exactly. This middle ground stiffness is absolutely perfect for gradually transferring the heavy mechanical load from the ultra-rigid metal stem down into the much softer living bone, preventing stress concentrations that would crack the bone.
And how does it handle different types of force?
It is vitally important to know that PMMA is much stronger in compression than it is in tension or shear. It loves being squeezed downward. It hates being pulled apart or twisted.
Okay, earlier I said this was the glue, and you corrected me. I want to give the listener a visual here. If it isn't glue, what is it? Picture tile grout in a bathroom rather than superglue.
Right.
Superglue actually bonds chemically to two surfaces, fusing them, but grout just fills the empty space between the tiles and hardens into a physical wedge.
That is exactly how bone cement works. PMMA does not bond chemically to the bone, and it does not bond chemically to the metal implant. It is strictly a space filler.
So it's basically oozing into the microscopic pores and trabeculae of the spongy bone and filling the space around the metal stem and then hardening to mechanically lock itself in place.
Yes. It acts as a mechanical grout that interlocks with the bone structure to transfer loads. It relies entirely on physical interlocking, not chemical adhesion.
But this grout has a major structural weakness, doesn't it?
It does. Porosity. When the surgical team mixes the powder and liquid in a bowl with a spatula, they are inevitably whipping atmospheric air into the mixture.
Like whipping air into batter to make a cake.
Exactly. But in cement, those air bubbles get trapped inside as it hardens. Under the heavy mechanical stress of walking, those microscopic air bubbles, or pores, act as stress concentrators and crack starters.
Oh, I see.
A tiny fracture will initiate at the edge of a pore and spider web through the cement mantle, eventually leading to catastrophic shattering of the cement and loosening of the implant.
So how do we fix that? We can't have bubbly cement. Do they put it in a centrifuge to spin the air out?
Centrifugation has been tried historically, but it is less effective and cumbersome. The absolute standard, most significant way to suck the air out and radically reduce porosity is vacuum mixing.
Vacuum mixing. You mix it inside a sealed chamber.
You literally mix the powder and liquid inside a sealed cartridge that is hooked up directly to a vacuum line in the operating room.
And what level of vacuum is required to actually pull those bubbles out of a thick, gooey cement?
The standard requirement is roughly an 85% vacuum.
85%. I'm going to repeat that number twice because it's specific and important for the exams. Vacuum mixing at roughly 85% vacuum is the most significant way to reduce porosity in cement. Again, you need an 85% vacuum to effectively suck the air out and prevent crack starters.
Sure.
So pulling section 5 together. If you only remember one thing about cement PMMA's modulus, is right between cortical and cancellous bone. It acts as a mechanical space-filling grout rather than a chemical glue. And vacuum mixing at 85% is essential to cut its porosity.
Which brings us to the premium upgrade of the orthopedic world. We have our metal, our plastic, and our cement.
But plastic is still plastic. Even the highly cross-linked vitamin E stuff eventually wears down or can be scratched. What if a patient is young and active and we want a bearing surface that practically never scratches? We turn to ceramics.
Ceramics offer incredible, almost unparalleled wear resistance. The classic traditional ceramic used in orthopedics is alumina, or aluminum oxide.
How hard is alumina?
It is the absolute hardest material available in the entire orthopedic toolkit. It is significantly harder than cobalt-chrome. Because of this extreme hardness, it is phenomenally scratch-resistant.
And why is scratch resistance so important in a sealed joint?
Because it brilliantly resists what we call third body wear.
Third body wear. The first two bodies are the ball and the cup. What's the third body?
A rogue piece of debris. Imagine a tiny shard of hardened bone cement breaks off, or a microscopic flake of metal, and it gets caught between the ball and the cup.
Okay.
If the ball is metal, that hard debris will drag across it and gouge a deep scratch into the polished surface. That scratch will then act like a cheese grater on the plastic cup, destroying it rapidly.
But if the ball is made of alumina ceramic?
If a piece of bone or cement gets caught against an alumina head, the alumina will just crush it into dust without taking a single scratch. The surface remains pristine.
But, returning to our overarching theme of the day, there is always a compromise. What is the fatal flaw of the hardest material in the toolkit?
Because alumina is so incredibly hard, it is profoundly brittle. It lacks any ductility whatsoever.
Like a teacup.
Exactly. It carries a small, but very real risk of catastrophic fracture. If a patient with a ceramic head jumps off a tall wall and lands hard, the impact force can exceed the material's tolerance.
And if it breaks?
If an alumina head fractures inside a patient, it doesn't just crack in half. It shatters into thousands of microscopic, razor-sharp shards, completely destroying the joint and making the revision surgery an absolute nightmare to clean out.
So I'm going to repeat that trade-off twice because it defines the material. Alumina is the hardest material available and highly scratch-resistant, but its fatal flaw is that it is incredibly brittle and can shatter. Again, alumina is the hardest but most brittle. Is there a ceramic that is less likely to shatter?
There's another ceramic called zirconia.
Like cubic zirconia in fake diamonds.
Chemically related, yes. Zirconia is much tougher than alumina. It has a crystal structure that can actually absorb some energy, meaning it is much less likely to shatter under impact.
Great. Problem solved.
Not quite. It suffers from a completely different problem, an aging or phase transformation issue.
Aging. What does a rock do when it ages?
In the warm, wet, bodily fluid environment, zirconia undergoes a slow structural phase change at the microscopic level over several years. The crystal lattice essentially expands and distorts. This transformation roughens the surface of the ceramic, totally ruining its smooth wear properties.
So alumina shatters under impact, and zirconia ages badly in water. Did the alchemists find a middle ground?
They did. The modern compromise is a composite material called zirconia-toughened alumina, or ZTA.
ZTA.
It's exactly what it sounds like. We blend the two ceramic powders together. We get the supreme scratch resistance of the aluminum matrix, interspersed with microscopic grains of zirconia that absorb impact energy and stop cracks from propagating. It mitigates the flaws of both.
Okay, but let's throw a curveball. What if a patient comes in, they need a hip replacement, but they are severely allergic to trace metals, like the nickel often found in small amounts in cobalt-chrome? And let's say they are young and active, so they don't want a pure ceramic because they are terrified of it shattering while they are jogging. What do you give them?
For that specific scenario, we turn to a true marvel of modern material science, oxinium, or oxidized zirconium. It is an incredible metal-ceramic hybrid that bridges the gap.
How does that even work? How do you hybridize a metal and a ceramic?
You start by machining the joint out of a very specific metal alloy core. The core is exactly 97.5% zirconium and 2.5% niobium. It is a tough, strong metal.
Okay, 97.5% zirconium, 2.5% niobium.
Then you place that metal part into a specialized furnace and subject it to a proprietary heating process in the presence of oxygen.
Right.
As it heats up, the oxygen naturally infuses into the very surface lattice of the metal. This chemically oxidizes the surface, literally transforming the top layer of the metal into a hard zirconia ceramic skin.
Wait, it doesn't just coat it, like painting it?
No, it is not a coating. A coating can chip off. This is a continuous phase transformation. The metal atoms at the surface become ceramic.
How thick is the ceramic skin?
It is extremely thin, about 5 microns thick.
5 microns. That is microscopic. Let me visualize this. I'm picturing an M&M candy.
Okay.
You have this incredibly hard, scratch-resistant candy shell on the outside that's your 5-micron thick ceramic layer. But inside, instead of chocolate, you have a tough, resilient, yielding metal core that can absorb impact without shattering like a pure ceramic teacup would.
The M&M analogy is brilliant. That is exactly how oxinium functions mechanically. It combines the structural strength and fracture toughness of a metal core with the pristine, scratch-resistant wear behavior of a ceramic surface.
And what about the allergies?
Because the core is exclusively zirconium and niobium, it contains absolutely zero cobalt, zero chromium, and zero trace nickel. It is perfectly biocompatible, making it the ultimate solution for patients with severe metal hypersensitivities.
That is just so cool. That feels like the peak of the alchemist's toolkit. Okay, before we move into the final phase, putting it all into motion, let's do our second mid-episode recap. Let's make sure the whole picture is clear.
Let's do it.
First, we covered the plastics. Polyethylene's enemy is oxidation or chain scission. We cross-link it with gamma rays to make it wear-resistant, but that leaves free radicals, so we soak it up with a vitamin E sponge. We use the cross-linked XLPE in the hip, but conventional plastic in the knee because of the high port-loading stress. Second, the cement. PMMA is a space-filling mechanical grout, not a chemical glue. Its modulus sits right between cortical and cancellous bone, and you must vacuum mix it at 85% to suck out the air bubbles and fix the porosity.
Spot on.
Third, the ceramics. Alumina is the hardest but most brittle it can shatter. ZTA is the toughened compromise. And oxinium is the ultimate M&M hybrid, a tough metal core with a hard 5-micron ceramic skin, perfect for metal allergies.
Perfectly synthesized.
So if you only remember one thing from this ceramic section, alumina is the hardest but most brittle. Oxinium is the ultimate hybrid with a metal core and a ceramic surface.
So we now have all our materials. We know their atomic properties, their strengths, and their fatal flaws. We've built the optimal compromise-driven joint.
Right.
But a joint sitting on a table is useless. Now, we must put the human body into motion and look at the physics of how these materials actually grind against each other inside the patient.
Which brings us to the final chapter of our deep dive, the physics of wear and tear, formerly known as tribology, and the inevitable return of the trunnion. Tribology is the study of friction, lubrication, and wear. And there is a mathematical fact here about wear in a hip joint that feels completely 100% counterintuitive to me.
You were talking about the relationship between volumetric wear and head size.
Yes. Logic would tell you that if you use a bigger femoral head, a bigger metal ball, it distributes the force of your body weight over a much larger surface area, so it should wear down the plastic cup less. But the reality is the exact opposite.
It is. Volumetric wear, the actual physical amount of plastic debris generated, actually increases with a larger head size.
Why? If I have a bigger femoral head on my hip implant, I have better stability, right? A bigger ball is much harder to accidentally pop out of the socket.
You were absolutely right about the clinical benefit. You get significantly better stability and a much better range of motion with a larger head.
Yeah.
But think about the geometry of a sphere rotating in a cup.
Okay.
Every time you take a step, the head rotates a certain number of degrees inside the socket.
Right. The arc of your leg swinging.
A larger head has a much larger circumference. That means for the exact same angular movement of your leg, say, a 30-degree swing, a point on the surface of a large head has to physically slide a much greater linear distance across the plastic liner than a point on a small head would.
Oh, it's like the outside lane of a running track. It's literally just dragging across more plastic real estate with every single step.
Exactly. The sliding distance is greater, and in tribology, more sliding distance equals more friction, which directly generates a larger volume of wear debris.
Wow.
So a bigger head gives you wonderful stability, but the inescapable price is increased volumetric wear of the plastic.
I'm going to repeat this dynamic twice because it is an absolute trap if you just guess based on intuition. Volumetric wear increases with a larger head size. Again, volumetric wear increases with a larger head size because the surface slides a greater distance per step.
But wait, sliding distance isn't the only force at play? What about frictional torque? Frictional torque is the twisting force that the rotating head applies to the socket. When the ball tries to turn, friction tries to grab the plastic cup and twist it along with the ball.
Right.
This torque is directly proportional to the ratio of the head diameter to the socket diameter.
So if you have a massive metal head jammed tightly into a thin plastic socket,
The frictional torque is huge. The friction can actually grab the socket and try to twist it right out of the bone, ripping the cement mantle apart.
that sounds like a fast track to a failed joint. How do we stop that twisting force?
This brings us to a foundational concept in the history of orthopedics, the Charnley principle.
Charnley principle.
So John Charnley, the pioneer of the modern total hip replacement, recognized this twisting problem. To solve it, he specifically designed his implants using a tiny 22-millimeter head inside a very large, thick plastic socket.
So a small ball in a massive cup.
Exactly. By doing this small head, big cup, he radically minimized the frictional torque. The small head just spins freely in the center, and he successfully prevented the plastic cup from twisting and loosening from the bone.
Small head, big cup. The Charnley principle. Okay, but how does the size of the head relate to the size of the metal neck it sits on?
That is another crucial geometric concept, the head-neck ratio. This ratio dictates your range of motion before impingement occurs.
Impingement meaning the point where the metal neck of the stem physically bangs into the rim of the plastic cup, stopping the leg from moving further.
Yes. A bigger head sitting on a very skinny neck gives you a huge, wide arc of motion before the neck hits the rim.
But there is a specific math trap here that our sources highlight. Let's walk through it. Imagine you have a 32-millimeter head sitting on a 16-millimeter neck. How does that compare to a 22-millimeter head sitting on an 11-millimeter neck?
It behaves exactly the same. They both share the exact same 2-to-1 ratio.
Right.
This means they both have the identical primary arc of motion before impingement. Size itself doesn't matter for the theoretical arc of motion. Only the ratio matters.
That is fascinating. Okay, now we finally arrive at the operating room table. We have our titanium stem driven into the femur. We have our cobalt-chrome head in our hand. How do the surgeons actually attach this modular head onto the metal stem so it stays there forever?
They use a friction fit mechanism called a taper lock, located at the trunnion.
The trunnion. We mentioned this an hour ago. Describe what the trunnion actually looks like.
It's essentially a very slightly cone-shaped metal post at the top of the stem's neck. And inside the bottom of the bearing head, there's a perfectly matching cone-shaped hole. You just slide the head onto the post.
But they don't screw it in. They don't weld it.
No. It relies entirely on cold welding through physical deformation. But how the surgeon jams them together matters immensely to the survival of the joint.
Okay.
First, the taper must be perfectly clean and totally dry.
Yeah.
No blood, no fat.
And to seat it.
To seat it properly, the surgeon places an impactor tool over the head and must hit it with one single firm axial strike with a heavy mallet.
One big hit. Why not just tap it gently 3 or 4 times to make sure it's snug and seated properly?
Because the physics of the metal deformation require a single, massive wave of high-energy impact. One single firm hit provides vastly more contact pressure and seats the taper much tighter than several smaller taps ever could.
Oh, I see.
Tapping it multiple times actually bounces the head microscopically and fails to achieve the cold weld.
So seat the taper with one single firm hit. And if you don't, what happens if that junction isn't perfectly locked? What if there is a tiny bit of give?
If it isn't perfectly locked, or even if it is seated well, but the patient is very heavy and the forces are too great, you get micromotion at that modular head-neck taper.
Hold on, micromotion at a modular junction.
Does that ring a bell?
It absolutely does. We are looping all the way back to section 2. We talked about this an hour ago when we looked at the acid bath.
Exactly. This is the culmination of our entire deep dive.
Trunnionosis. It's the fretting and crevice corrosion. The micromotion at this exact taper junction is continuously scraping away the passivation armor, exposing the raw titanium and cobalt-chrome to the salty body fluid.
Yes. Trunnionosis is the devastating clinical result of that fretting corrosion. The microscopic vibrations eat away the armor, the raw metal corrodes, and because it's a tight crevice, The local pH drops, accelerating the acid attack.
Ah.
It releases toxic metal debris, cobalt and chromium ions directly into the surrounding muscle, causing severe adverse local tissue reactions, pseudotumors, and catastrophic joint failure.
It's all connected.
It is. The more modular component interfaces you add to an implant, if you have a separate head, separate neck piece, separate modular sleeves, the higher the risk of this fretting corrosion destroying the joint from the inside out.
Wow. If you only remember one thing from our final section, bigger heads generate more volumetric wear. Frictional torque follows the Charnley principle of a small head in a big cup, and a modular taper must be seated with one single, firm hit to lock the trunnion and prevent fretting.
It really highlights how every single engineering choice is a trade-off.
It does. Which brings us to the end of our journey. We are going to do a fast-paced conversational lightning round to synthesize the ultimate takeaways from our entire deep dive. We've talked about a lot of parts, but let's connect the dots one last time. We started with our metals, specifically titanium and cobalt-chrome.
Right, the ultimate structural compromise. We use titanium for the stems because of its low modulus, it prevents stress shielding and lets the bone thrive. But because it has terrible wear properties, we switch to cobalt-chrome for the bearings because its supreme hardness resists scratching.
But the moment we lock that titanium stem to that cobalt-chrome head, we introduce the chemistry of corrosion.
Exactly. We know mixing completely different metals like stainless steel and cobalt-chrome causes galvanic corrosion, essentially building a battery. But even with titanium and cobalt-chrome, if the junction isn't perfectly stable, we invite fretting corrosion.
The micromotion scraping away the invisible oxide armor. And if we look at how we shape these metals, we see another compromise with work hardening and annealing.
Right. We can hammer the metal cold work hardening to make it vastly stronger, but it becomes dangerously brittle. Or we can use heat annealing to reverse that, decreasing the strength but restoring its essential ductility.
Then we looked at the cushion, the polyethylene. We know its mortal enemy is oxidation.
Chain scission. To stop it from wearing out mechanically, we blast it with gamma rays to cross-link it. But that leaves free radicals that invite oxidation. So we mop them up with a vitamin E sponge.
And we use that cross-linked XLPE for the highly conforming hip, but stick to the conventional plastic for the knee due to shear stress. Then we anchor it all with PMMA cement, which isn't glue, but a mechanical grout.
A grout whose modulus perfectly bridges the gap between metal and bone. And we must use 85% vacuum mixing to eliminate the porosity that causes it to crack.
For our premium patients, we have ceramics. Alumina is the hardest but most brittle, while oxinium gives us the M&M hybrid, a tough metal core with a hard 5-micron ceramic skin to prevent allergies. And finally, the physics of assembling it all.
Remembering that bigger heads cause more volumetric wear, but a small head inside a big cup minimizes torque. And to bring it all together safely, we seat that taper with one single firm hit.
You know, when you synthesize it all like that, it is truly remarkable how beautifully and sometimes tragically the engineering loops back on itself. The chemistry of passivation and fretting corrosion that we introduced in the very first few minutes of this dive turned out to be the exact physical mechanism, trunnionosis, that leads to the catastrophic failure at the very end of the implant's life. The beginning is the end.
It's incredibly poetic in a highly mechanical sort of way. Every solution breeds a new challenge.
It is. And it leaves me with one final provocative thought that I want you, the listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your day or as you prepare for whatever comes next. We've spent this entire hour talking deeply about the metals, the plastics, and the ceramics. We've talked exhaustively about how to engineer and optimize the artificial materials so they can survive the brutal, acidic environment of the body. But consider the inverse. Think about the living bone, the muscle tissue, the immune system. How does the living, breathing human tissue adapt, react, and fundamentally change over the course of decades when it is forced into a lifelong, inescapable physical marriage with these unyielding metals and plastics? The body isn't just a passive container holding a metal rod. It's a dynamic, active participant in this compromise, constantly remodeling itself around the intruder. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute blast unpacking the Orthopedic Alchemist toolkit with you. Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning the ground you walk on.